ever get that feeling, like right before a big event, maybe a wedding or giving a presentation, or even just like a dinner party you're hosting? You feel this pressure for everything to be absolutely perfect, every single detail just so.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling well. Trying to get everything just right.
But what if I told you that the really successful events, the ones people remember, the ones that have a positive impact, what if those aren't about hitting some impossible standard of flawlessness? What if it's more about being ready for things to not go perfectly?
Interesting. Being prepared for the imperfect. I like that.
Right, because let's be honest, something unexpected always happens. So today we're going to dive deep into the world of event planning and how being prepared for those bumps is the real key to creating something truly memorable.
Yeah, I'm really excited to dig into this. We've got some great materials here that break down the whole process, from that initial
Hmm.
aha moment of an idea all the way to that critical look back after it's all done.
Exactly. And for you, dear listener, our mission today is to pull out the core strategies, the real gems of insight from all of this information. We want to give you a framework, a way of thinking that lets you approach any event, big or small, not with that feeling of dread or overwhelm, but feeling like you're in control.
Absolutely. Like, you've got this.
Before we get started, though, a big thank you to London Heartbeats Academy UK for their support in making this deep dive possible.
They've got over 150 courses, so I bet there's something there for everyone.
Definitely worth checking out. And make sure to subscribe to their social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, so you don't miss out on their regular updates and all the amazing discussions they host.
So, shall we kick things off at the very beginning? The birth of an event idea.
Let's do it. And one thing that comes up over and over in our materials is the importance of discussion and consultation.
Right, making sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, but it's more than just casual chatting, right? These sources emphasize that it has to be this deep dive into every little detail of the event proposal and with everyone who's going to play a role.
Absolutely. Everyone who's involved in the planning and the actual, on the ground doing.
And why is that level of thoroughness so crucial right at the start?
Well, because you need that shared understanding, that feeling of ownership from everyone involved right from the beginning.
Makes sense.
The sources highlight, a few key questions you need to answer together. First, what's the main aim of this event? Like the big picture goal you're shooting for.
Okay, the why behind it all.
Exactly. Then there's the specific objectives. How will you know if you've actually succeeded?
Right, how to measure that success.
And lastly, what kind of event are we talking about here? Is it a conference, a workshop, a party, a webinar? Getting everyone aligned on those fundamentals early on? Well, that's going to save you so much headache later.
Right, it's like trying to build a house where the architect, the builder, and the decorator are all working from different blueprints.
Chaos.
Exactly. So you've got to have that unified vision. But once you've had those in-depth discussions and you're all on the same page, how do you actually flesh out that event idea, make it more concrete?
Research. That's the next crucial stage. Looking outside those initial discussions for inspiration, for ideas that will help you really shape the event.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about coming up with the idea in a vacuum. You need to see what's out there.
Exactly. Gather ideas that'll help you define the style of the event. Should it be formal, relaxed, somewhere in between? Research can also give you a sense of how long the event needs to be to actually achieve those objectives without, losing people's attention.
Right. No one wants to be stuck at a boring event that drags on forever.
And maybe the most exciting part is finding those unique activities, the things that'll make your event stand out, the stuff people will talk about afterward.
I love that. So it's not just about copying what others have done, but taking those ideas and turning them into something special, something new. Where should people be looking for these inspiring ideas?
Honestly, everywhere. Think about past events, ones you've been to, ones your organization has held, ones in your industry.
Okay, so kind of a what worked, what didn't work analysis.
But also look at industry trends, different event formats, even things completely outside your field. You never know where that spark of inspiration might come from.
Right, thinking outside the box.
Online resources, magazines, even competitor events, all good sources. And don't forget about feedback from people who attended past events. That's gold.
Makes sense. So you're gathering all these different pieces and then you're...
Synthesizing, adapting. It's like building a mood board, but for an event.
I like that visual. So we've had in-depth discussions, we've done our research, and we've got this amazing, unique event idea. What's the final step before we actually dive into the detailed planning?
Formal agreement. It's not enough to just, have talked about it and done some research, you need a decision, a buy-in from everyone who matters.
Right, making it official.
Exactly. The sources really stress this point. You have to present that fully developed idea, incorporating all those insights to the right people or departments, whether it's a formal proposal or a presentation. The key is to make sure everyone who needs to be on board actually understands what you're proposing and gives their approval before you start spending time and resources on the nitty-gritty planning.
Okay, so it's like getting that stamp of approval, making sure everyone's aligned.
Yeah, it's about creating that solid foundation, knowing that the event you're planning is the one everyone agreed on. Only then can you start building the actual structure of the event.
Makes perfect sense. So the idea is approved, the vision is clear. Now we get into the heavy lifting, the real work of planning, right?
You got it. And the first thing our sources highlight is the importance of a comprehensive event plan, along with a realistic timeline.
Okay, the plan and the timeline. Those sound essential, but I think for a lot of people, the idea of creating those can be a bit overwhelming. Where do you even begin?
Well, the sources break it down into three core principles.
Hmm.
And the first one, arguably the most important, is give yourself time.
Time. Easier said than done sometimes.
I know, right? But planning an event, even a small one, involves so many different tasks, so many moving pieces. You've got to factor in enough time for each of those stages. Researching vendors, setting up, even just, following up afterwards. Trying to rush it all? Well, that's a recipe for stress, mistakes, and a less successful event overall.
I can definitely see that. You need that breathing room to handle the unexpected, to make sure things are done right. So giving yourself enough time is principle number one. What's the second?
Get organized.
Okay, that makes sense. With all those moving parts, you've got to stay on top of things.
Exactly. Whether it's vendors, guest lists, budgets, activities, a structured approach is crucial. Find a system for managing information, for making decisions and documenting them.
So that nothing slips through the cracks.
Exactly. It could be project management software,
Yeah.
spreadsheets, online docs, even just a really good set of checklists and folders.
Right, whatever works best for you and your team.
The point is to find a way to stay in control and prevent those crucial details from getting lost in the shuffle.
Organization is so important, but often overlooked. Knowing where everything is, having that overview of progress, it just makes everything run so much smoother. What's the third principle?
Remember to communicate. And I'd say that's probably the most overlooked aspect of event planning.
Communication. It sounds so simple, but I bet it's where a lot of things go wrong.
It really is. From those very first discussions to the final evaluation, clear and consistent communication is essential.
Right, keeping everyone in the loop.
Yep, your internal team needs to know what's happening, what decisions have been made, what challenges you're facing.
What about external folks?
Same thing. You need to be communicating clearly with vendors, suppliers, the venue management, and of course, your attendees, your VIPs. Everyone needs to have the information they need.
So communication is really the glue that holds the whole thing together.
Absolutely. A small communication breakdown can have a ripple effect and turn into a big problem really quickly.
Okay, so we have our three guiding principles. Give yourself time, get organized, and remember to communicate. We've got our event idea approved. How do we actually create that detailed event plan and timeline?
Well, now you take that high-level vision and turn it into a roadmap. You develop this comprehensive plan that breaks down every single aspect of the event into smaller, manageable tasks. Think of it like a blueprint.
I see. So each piece of the event, from booking the speakers to ordering the napkins, is clearly defined and assigned.
That's it. And this plan, this is your Bible. It's going to guide you throughout the whole process.
So it's not just a vague idea of what needs to happen, it's very specific actions.
Very specific. And then, working alongside that detailed plan, you create your timeline.
So the timeline is linked to the plan, but it's
Less granular. It gives you that high-level overview of the key milestones and deadlines. You can visualize the flow of the project, see if you're on track, identify any potential bottlenecks.
right. So the plan is the instruction manual and the timeline is the schedule.
That's a great way to put it.
And is there a final check at this stage just to make sure everything's aligned?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
You compare your shiny new plan and timeline to that original event proposal that got approved.
Okay, so it's a quality control check.
Exactly. You want to make sure that everything you agreed on in those initial stages is reflected in your detailed planning documents. Nothing's been left out, nothing's been misunderstood. This step is super important to prevent what they call scope creep,
Yeah.
where things start to grow and change beyond the original vision.
It's like that final gut check. Are we still on track with what we set out to do?
Exactly. Okay, so now we have our plan, our timeline, everything's checked and double-checked. What's next?
Well, I'm guessing it's time to get into the specifics of all the different areas that make up an event.
You're right on the money. Our sources call this key areas in your event plan. It's where we go from that big picture framework to the individual pieces that need to be managed. And the very first area they highlight is, of course, the budget.
The dreaded budget, everyone's favorite topic.
But so important. And the sources make it clear that it's not just about setting a number at the beginning and hoping for the best.
Right, it's a living thing, right.
It is. It starts as a high-level outline of what you think things will cost, and then it evolves, becomes more and more detailed as you plan.
So you're constantly refining it.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so valuable. Once you've got those details, it becomes your tool for monitoring spending throughout the whole process, making sure you're staying within those financial limits.
It's like a financial roadmap.
Yeah.
So what are some of the costs people should be thinking about at this stage?
Well, the venue itself is often a big one.
Right, that can really eat up a chunk of the budget.
Then there's catering, food, drinks, staff. And you've got audiovisual equipment, microphones, speakers, projectors, all that. Don't forget about transportation, maybe shuttle buses for guests or transportation for your speakers.
Right, those logistics can add up.
And then there's staffing, not just catering staff, but maybe you need ushers, security, people for registration, and those smaller things like stationery, printing.
Invitations, programs, all that jazz.
Exactly. All of those things need to be factored in.
It's easy to overlook those smaller costs, but they definitely add up.
They do. So, yeah, getting that budget in place early on and keeping a close eye on it as you go along is super important.
Absolutely. So we've got our budget figured out. What's the next piece of the puzzle?
Setting the date. And this might seem simple, but our sources actually highlight some important things to consider.
Right, it's not just about picking a random day on the calendar.
Exactly. You want to avoid conflicts with other big events happening around the same time.
Okay, so you don't want to compete for attendees.
Exactly. And you need to think about the schedules of key people, speakers, VIPs. Their calendars can get pretty booked up.
So it's about finding that sweet spot where the date works for everyone and it doesn't clash with anything else important.
It's a balancing act for sure.
Okay, the date is set. We're moving along. What's next on our event planning checklist?
Well, once you've got the date, then you start thinking about the timings for the event.
Oh, interesting. So more than just a start and end time.
Way more. This is about the entire flow of the day.
Okay, so it's getting really granular now.
Yep. The sources even suggest creating a matrix to map everything out, kind of like a visual timeline.
Ah, I can see how that would be helpful.
You can see how the different pieces of the event fit together, how they interact. And staying on track with these timings, that's key for a smooth running event.
Right, you don't want things to get all jumbled up and out of order.
Exactly. You also need to be ready to deal with any delays. Sometimes things happen and you have to adjust on the fly.
Being flexible is key.
It really is.
Yep.
And a big part of this is thinking about the flow of the event right from the beginning, how people will arrive, how they'll move through the different activities, how they'll depart.
So it's like designing the entire guest experience.
You got it. And there are some great tools that can help with this. Gantt charts are one example. They visually show you the timeline, the dependencies between tasks.
I've seen those. They can be very helpful for complex projects.
They really are. And then the final piece of this is breaking down each task into its smallest parts, creating checklists for every detail.
So nothing gets missed.
Exactly. That level of planning and organization will make a huge difference on the day of the event.
Okay, so we're getting a real sense of how much detail goes into managing the timings of an event. Now, what about the VIPs? How do we make sure those special guests have a great experience?
The sources are really clear on this. Working with VIPs is all about making them feel valued and respected.
Right, they're your special guests.
It starts well before the event, making sure you check their availability early on when you're setting the date.
So you're accommodating their busy schedule.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then as the event gets closer, you keep them informed of all the details, any special arrangements you've made.
Right, so they feel like they're in the loop.
Yep. And then on the day of the event, make sure you formally introduce them, give them that recognition.
And what about after the event?
Don't forget to thank you. Let them know you appreciate their participation, their contribution. That goes a long way in building those relationships.
It's the little things that count. So we've made sure our VIPs are happy. Now let's talk about one of the biggest pieces of the logistical puzzle, choosing the venue.
The venue can make or break an event, so this is a big one.
It really sets the stage. So where do you even begin?
It starts with a broad search. You're looking for potential venues that meet your basic criteria: capacity, location, any special facilities you might need.
Okay, so casting a wide net.
Exactly. And then once you have a list of possibilities, you start narrowing it down.
Right, get more specific.
Yep. Now you're looking at things like the exact location, accessibility, the quality of facilities, how much it costs.
So does it fit your budget?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And visiting the venues in person, that's crucial.
Oh, definitely. Pictures can be deceiving.
You need to get a feel for the space, see it with your own eyes.
Right. Does it have the right vibe? Are there any logistical challenges you didn't notice in the photos?
Exactly. That's where a site visit is invaluable.
And what about special requirements, like beyond just the basic space?
Well, that really depends on the type of event you're having.
Right, every event is different.
Exactly. You might need specific audiovisual equipment, changing rooms, staging, extra furniture. It's important to identify those needs early on and make sure any venue you're considering can accommodate them.
So you're not scrambling at the last minute trying to figure out how to make things work.
Right. And once you've found that perfect venue,
You lock it down.
exactly, you book all the spaces you need, and then comes the fun part, planning the layout.
Oh, I love that part. It's like playing Tetris with furniture and people.
It kind of is. You have to think about the size of the event, the format, the activities.
Will people be seated, standing? Will there be presentations, networking areas, food stations?
All of that. A well-designed layout makes a huge difference in how smoothly the event flows.
So you're not just cramming everyone into a room and hoping for the best.
Definitely not.
Okay, venue sorted. Now we need to figure out who's actually coming to this amazing event. That brings us to the guest list.
The guest list. That can be a beast, especially for larger events.
I bet. Where do you even start?
The key is to have one person or a small team in charge of the master list.
Right, someone who's responsible for gathering all the information.
Exactly. Names, contact details, affiliations, all of that. And it's not just about getting the initial list, it's about keeping it up to date.
Because things change. People's plans change.
They do. And that master list becomes your Bible for so many other things, especially invitations.
Right, because you can't invite people if you don't know who they are. Speaking of which, let's talk about invitations. It's a bit more than just sending a quick email, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. There's an art to invitations, and it often starts with that save the date notice, especially if it's a big event or if you think people might need to plan ahead.
Okay, so that's giving people a heads up early on.
Exactly. Then the actual invitation, ideally about 8 weeks before the event.
8 weeks? That's good lead time.
It is. And there are several steps involved here: designing the invitation, proofreading it carefully, getting it printed if you're doing paper invites, addressing them, getting any necessary approvals.
It's like a whole production.
It can be. And one thing the sources really emphasize is keeping your branding consistent.
Oh, right. So using the same logo, wording, colors.
Exactly. It makes everything look professional and cohesive.
So you're creating a visual identity for the event. What about the information on the invitation itself? What are the absolute must-haves?
Well, obviously the date and time, the full address, and ideally a map or directions.
Okay, so people know where they're going.
Yep. And if there's a dress code, make sure that's clear. You should also include the name of the host or organizer, a short description of the event, and the RSVP date.
Right, so people know what to expect and when they need to respond.
Exactly. And then, super important, contact details for any questions. And if there's a limit on the number of guests per invitation, make sure that's stated clearly.
So you're covering all the bases.
Trying to. And then, once the invitations are out, you've got to manage those replies.
Right, keeping track of who's coming, who's not.
Yep. Logging those RSVPs, following up with people who haven't responded, maybe setting up a registration system if it's a big public event.
Staying on top of that can get tricky.
It can, but it's so important for all the other planning decisions, like how much food to order, how to arrange the seating.
Okay, so we've tackled invitations. Let's talk about another crucial element: catering.
The food. I think everyone looks forward to the food at an event.
It can really make or break the experience. So how do you go about finding the right caterer?
The first step is making a list of caterers who can handle your specific event, in terms of style and budget,
So you're doing your research again.
always. And it's a good idea to narrow it down to your top 2 or 3 choices and ask for sample menus.
I love looking at sample menus. It's like getting a sneak peek.
It is. And always ask if they can do extra portions, just in case.
Right. You never know if you'll have a few unexpected guests.
Exactly. And while you're at it, Talk to the venue manager about your catering plans.
Oh, right. Make sure everything aligns.
Yep. Do they have the right licenses for serving food and drinks? Do they have the facilities your caterer needs?
Good point. Those are important logistical details.
They are. And then, once you've got your caterer and venue sorted, it's time to agree on the menus.
Okay. The main event.
This is where you really think about your guests. Do you have any dietary restrictions to consider?
Vegetarian, vegan, allergies.
All of that. Make sure there are options for everyone. And make sure all the dishes are clearly labeled, both on the buffet and on any printed menus.
So people know what they're eating.
Exactly. Transparency is key.
Okay, so the food is taken care of. Now let's move on to the audio-visual aspects of the event.
The things that really bring it to life.
Exactly. What are some things to keep in mind when planning for AV?
Well, the first step is identifying all your needs.
Okay, so making a list of everything you'll need.
Exactly. Will you need microphones for speakers,
Mm.
a sound system, projectors and screens, staging, lighting? Get it all down on paper.
Right, so you're not forgetting anything.
Exactly. And once you have your list, talk to the venue manager.
See what they can provide.
Yep. Maybe they have some of the equipment you need in-house. Or maybe you'll need to rent some things from an outside company.
Good to know those details in advance.
Absolutely. And another thing to think about is photography.
Ah, yes. Capturing those memories.
If you're having a photographer, let your guests know ahead of time.
So they're not surprised.
Exactly. And give the photographer a clear brief.
You know, what specific shots you want them to get.
Exactly. And if it's an official photographer, maybe give them a media badge so they're easily identifiable.
That makes sense. Okay, we've got our audio-visual needs covered. Now, who are the people who will be making all of this happen on the day of the event? Let's talk about event staff.
Ah, the unsung heroes.
They really are. So how do you determine who you'll need and what their roles will be?
It's important to be really clear about roles and responsibilities early on in the planning.
So everyone knows what they're doing.
Exactly. Avoids confusion and duplication of effort. And the number of staff you'll need really depends on the size and complexity of the event.
Right. A small gathering might not need as many people as a large conference.
You got it. You might need people for registration, ushers, folks to manage catering, technical support, and security is another important consideration, especially for bigger events.
Right. Keeping everyone safe.
Exactly. Think about potential security risks and have a plan in place.
So you're prepared for anything. Okay, we've got our staff sorted. What about transportation?
That's something to consider if you're having guests travel between different venues.
Right, maybe from a conference center to a dinner venue.
Exactly. Think about how many guests you need to transport, the distances, the timing,
And of course, the cost.
always the cost. Then you can start looking for transport providers who can meet those needs.
So if your event involves multiple locations, transport is another big piece of the puzzle.
It is.
Now, let's talk about getting the word out and making sure we're covered in case of any mishaps. That's where publicity and insurance come in, right?
Exactly. For publicity, you need a strategy to reach your target audience.
Right. How are you going to let people know about this amazing event?
It could be online advertising, social media, flyers, press releases.
Whatever works for your audience.
Exactly. And if you have any big-name speakers or guests, definitely highlight that in your publicity materials.
People are drawn to familiar names.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's insurance.
The less glamorous but very important part.
It is. Think about what kind of coverage you need.
Right. What are the potential risks? What could go wrong?
Exactly. Maybe the venue has some insurance that covers certain things. Or maybe you need to get your own event insurance.
Good to be prepared. Okay, so we've got the word out. We're insured. What are some of those finer details that can really enhance the guest experience?
Things like table plans, place cards, badges.
Ah, the little things that make a big difference.
They really do. Table plans are important if you're having a sit-down meal.
So you're strategically arranging people.
Exactly. Think about who should sit with whom, how to facilitate networking. It's also a good idea to share the draft plan with any speakers or VIPs ahead of time.
So they know where they'll be sitting.
Yep. And then you need to display the final plan clearly at the event so people can find their tables.
No one wants to be wandering around lost.
Definitely not. Then you've got place cards, which assign specific seats at the tables.
It's a nice personal touch.
It is. And badges, those depend on the type of event.
Right. Maybe not necessary for a small dinner party.
But for larger events, especially if there's a lot of networking, badges can be really helpful. People can see each other's names and affiliations.
It breaks the ice a bit.
It does. So those are some of the finishing touches that can really elevate the guest experience.
We've covered so much ground.
Mhm.
And I know our sources also mention the importance of checklists.
Checklists are your friend. They help you stay organized, make sure you're not forgetting anything.
I'm a big fan of checklists.
They're lifesavers.
Yeah.
The sources even suggest having checklists for different stages of the planning process. The proposal, the budget, the guest list, invitations.
So you're breaking it down into manageable chunks.
Exactly. It's a way to stay on top of all those moving parts.
Okay, we've meticulously planned everything. Now it's showtime. The event is here.
Time to put all that planning into action.
Exactly. What are some things to focus on in those final days and hours leading up to the event?
It's all about confirming details and doing those last-minute checks.
Right, making sure everything is in place.
Reconfirm the date, time, location with everyone.
No room for error there.
Definitely not.
Mhm.
Make sure all your VIP arrangements are finalized. Confirm who's doing what on your team. And super important, make sure everyone knows the emergency exit procedures.
Safety first.
Always. And this is also the time to finalize any protocols or scripts you might need, like how to introduce VIPs or make announcements.
So you're prepared for all the different scenarios.
Exactly. And if you're doing table plans, place cards, badges, make sure those are ready to go.
So the setup can go smoothly.
Exactly.
Okay, now it's time for the actual setup.
Transforming that venue into the event space you envisioned.
What are some of the key things to keep in mind during the setup process?
Well, first off, make sure all your staff stewards, security, first aid are in place and know what they're doing.
Right, you need everyone in their positions.
Exactly. Clear signage is essential so people can find their way around.
No one wants to be wandering around aimlessly.
Nope. Set up your registration desk. Make sure your event branding is visible. Cable cloths, posters, that kind of thing. Think about practicalities. Do you need a coat check?
Especially if it's cold outside.
Exactly. Check the lighting. Is it sufficient? Are there any areas that need to be highlighted?
Setting the mood.
Yep. If you're doing presentations or awards, make sure all those materials are organized and ready to go. Set up the stage, make sure there are refreshments for speakers, and prepare any announcements you need to make.
So you're creating that